Hello, listeners, aka fellow randoms. My name's Kev Duffy, and this is our 10th episode. That's right, we hit double digits today, folks. 10th episode of What's Your Random podcast, where I discover and celebrate individual and independent creativity from the inception of an idea to the process of bringing it to life. And on this 10th episode, a momentous occasion, I'd appreciate it if you listen to the episode and vet it, and if you love it, or at least maybe even like it, you go out and share and help us build our audience. And while you're at it, we would very much appreciate if you could head over to Apple Podcasts and give us a rating, maybe write a comment about the podcast, and subscribe there, as well as on Spotify and YouTube, where you could actually watch me interacting directly over Zoom, over the internet, with guests. Hard to get used to the new world we're living in, but it is a digital one. But that doesn't mean that we can't have face-to-face interactions, and I'm very much enjoying seeing my guests. And if you would enjoy seeing the conversation take place, go on over to YouTube and check it out there. And as always, or at least from the third or fourth podcast here at What's Your Random, hang on after the guest leaves for a quick debriefing, just my closing thoughts, some key takeaways, and areas where I think I could improve the process, yes, and improve, I'm getting tongue-tied, improve the process and include, improve the process and improve the podcast moving forward. I think I'll just leave that in there to show people that it's pretty easy for me to stumble over my own tongue and words when I'm speaking off the cuff. But without further ado, today's guest is Henry Barajas, a comic book writer and storyteller, best known for his comic book Voz De M.A.Y.O, Tata Rambo, a comic about his great grandfather who was a activist on the north side of the Mexican border protecting indigenous rights. We delved into that story a little bit, but our focus today was Henry's new story, Helm Grey Castle. It has 7 days left on its Kickstarter. So before you listen to the episode, go check out Helm Grey Castle on Kickstarter and consider supporting Henry in his newest endeavor. And if you don't support him before the podcast, you may very well jump on it after the podcast, because Henry goes into some of the layers of depth that make up this fantasy comic that takes place in Mexico. It has a diverse cast of characters who have their own individual interests and needs and wants. It has the history of Mexico at that time, with Spanish conquistadors coming in, and then it explores things like magic. So really historical, really personal, and I am very excited for it myself. So check out Helm Grey Castle on Kickstarter.com. And then come back here and listen to a very lively and very engaging discussion with my guest, Henry Barajas. Enjoy the random. All right. So welcome to What's Your Random, Henry Barajas. Henry is here today to discuss his Kickstarter that I think, was it just successful or it's ongoing?
Yeah, it was. We are at 15 days as of today, and we hit our goal yesterday.
Yeah, congratulations. But there's still 15 days left. Anybody listening, it looks like a very engaging comic in the fantasy genre, and that's what we're going to discuss today. But if you haven't done so already, pause the podcast with every intention to come back. Pause the podcast, go check out the Kickstarter, support Henry and his project, and then come back with us here as we discuss Henry's random, his ideas and his creativity, his process, and how he brings a comic book to life. So Henry, welcome. And I could just start by asking you to introduce yourself and that project.
Thanks for having me. My name is Henry Barajas. I am the author and co-creator of Helm Grey Castle. I also have written a graphic novel that debuted last year this month called Voz De M.A.Y.O, Tata Rambo. I'm most known for that. It's a graphic memoir biography about my great grandfather and his how he helped the Pasquayaki tribe keep their land, protest against the city of Tucson, and uh, ensure that the Interstate 10 construction did not displace the tribe or take their land, and ensure and rooted them in the community. That was a, a a project that was 5 years of development, and it was 3 time. I did 3 Kickstarters to make that possible, and I'm very lucky that my employer, Top Cow Productions, believed in me and helped me publish the graphic novel so that I ensured a international distribution. So
Very
I
cool.
called my shot. I wanted my big first graphic novel to be published by Top Cow and Image Comics, and it happened. Very, very, very lucky, and a lot of hard work went into that. So currently, I am writing a comic called Helm Grey Castle. The pitch is, what if Mordor, Lord of the Rings realm, had a south side, and that south side was the Mesoamerican land of Mexico. What if Mexico was not conquered by the Spanish conquistadors? So it's a mixture of fantasy and Mesoamerican history, but also gives me enough creative freedom to flesh out a possible world that could have. What if they had a little bit longer? They were, and also tell a story that just doesn't really paint them as brutal murderers that cut out hearts and sacrificed people. So I think people tend to forget that as the Aztecs gave us the Mayan, or the Mayans gave us the Mayan calendar that we use today. So I want to explore more of those those qualities of these people that often their history is told by white people, or scholars that aren't indigenous to Mexico. So this is a story that's also heavily influenced by the Broken Spears indigenous account that was really influential to me, and also my time researching about the Pasquayaki tribe and how their escape from Mexico, and how a lot of that, the invasion of the conquistadors, the Mexican French War, led them to where my hometown is. So I
And
wanted to do.
that's
What
in
was that?
Arizona. Where
Yeah,
is your
in
hometown?
Arizona, southern
Arizona.
Arizona. Yeah, and so I wanted to honor myself as a writer who tries to root my fiction in truth, but also tell a story with swords and sorcery, and have a little bit of fun.
Yeah. Is there any other inspiration besides, you mentioned quite directly Lord of the Rings? Are there other fantasy novels, comics, movies that influence you?
When it comes to influence, one of the books, or I guess I didn't read any fantasy novels growing up. Being a Mexican American kid, that's not something was marketed to me. I don't think that was real, and it was not relevant or prevalent in my community. Which that's something I'm trying to change. I'm trying to use this comic as a way to say, hey, the Mesoamerican culture, world, and people I think they influenced these white scholars that then become fantasy novelists, and use these types of uh, I guess the Aztec people and the Mystica people believed in magic. They actually thought that it was real. They sent sorcerers to fight the Spanish conquistadors, and unfortunately, they were met with swords and brutal violence. So I wanted to,
And disease maybe
and
if
disease. Yeah.
correct me if I'm wrong, but
Um, So I wanted to incorporate that. But Lord of the Rings is a big influence. I also really appreciate the Game of Thrones series. I've been told the books are good, but I don't feel comfortable jumping in since it's not over yet. So once we get that last novel, I'm sure I'll get around to reading it. But I was also a fan of Willow growing up, that
Me
movie,
too.
and Legend and Labyrinth, and but Lord of the Rings, it hit me when I was like in middle school, kind of came out until I was out of high school, so it kind of grew up with me in the video games, and I never asked that question, where where are the brown people? There's not a moment where I'm asking that. I'm so engulfed by that world. Another movie that influenced me was a movie called The Golden Child, starring Eddie Murphy. I don't know if you've ever seen that,
No, I don't think
but
so.
there is the reason why these adventurers are going into this mysterious world that's kind of shrouded and covered like Wakanda would be. They're sent on a task to save the last dragonborn, and when they're going to do this, they fall into another bigger storyline, and I feel like that's my kind of respect to playing D&D, like where when you're set on a quest, then you fall into these side quests, and then that kind of just drags your attention into what you're trying to do with your friends and the moderator. So yeah, this is also me exploring this world that I'm not very familiar with and learning more and
In
more
terms of
about
fantasy
fantasy.
realms.
Yeah.
Very cool. And you mentioned D&D, Dungeons and Dragons. I suppose that's also an influence, mentioning the side stories and adventures. How long have you
Yeah.
been playing? And
I've been playing for
uh,
2 years, and I had some friends that were baffled that I had never played or ever heard, really knew anything about it. And it was like, I'm sorry, this is not popular amongst Mexican American kids, and I wish it was, because all you need is a book, some sheets of paper, a trinket or something that can represent your character and your imagination, and you can
right.
be entertained. I mean, I just played last night for 3 hours, and I love playing, and I love the community that it inspires, and the people from my first game are all really close friends of mine, and I love them dearly, and I feel like Dungeons and Dragons can do a lot better job at marketing this to people of color, and it would just really explode on a bigger capacity.
Yeah, I think there's also maybe an element of generation too. I don't know how old you are. I'm 35, and
Okay.
when I would go to comic book shops, I would see an older generation playing with these mysterious figures on a very big board.
Yeah.
And I later came to find out that that was Dungeons and Dragons. I'm born in '85. I think maybe the marketing hit the generation that, the '80s, the kids born in the '80s and a little bit earlier. So that might be part of it too.
Oh,
But
definitely.
yeah, I'm interested to know more about, Helm of Grace Castle and specific areas where you think that maybe traditionally stories were borrowing from uh, South American or Central American cultures. And then also, on the flip side, as you create a new version of this fantasy with embedding it with your own experience and your own cultural heritage, elements that you think will be strong um, to infuse into fantasy from those cultures.
Well, the Aztecs believed in fire gods, and they believed in fire elemental gods. So I think D&D and fantasy really um, kind of draws a lot from that. And Helm of Grey Castle is basically, for me, like, what if Conan was this adopted hero with no home? And I think by the end of the series we'll find a little bit more about where he comes from, and I'm excited to get to that point. And the game that we have included in this comic book is written by Tristan J. Tarwater and with art by Jen Vaughn. And Jen Vaughn does a really fun show called Big Dun Jen Show on Twitch. And I got to play some indie, like alien type role playing game with her. And she's an amazing artist and really someone who's like a valued member of the role playing community. And Tristan J. Tarwater, they wrote games for Rolled and Told, which I thought was a brilliant idea. It was like A4 magazine size. It did really well at comic book stores. And I wanted to do something like that for Top Cow. And so like it was kind of just like, and this was supposed to come out a little bit earlier. And I'm glad that I had some more time to spend with this during the pandemic, really punch up the script, being able to recruit Tristan and Jen to come in and make a game that's set in the world. Doesn't have any of the characters, but it's set before the Spanish conquistadors show up. So you're playing some warriors in a tribe in Central America, and you are greeted with a bird and a mirror on its head telling you to find a magical item. And you get to explore this beautiful Aztec world before the Spanish conquistadors come and ruin it. So the other reason go ahead.
No, yeah. So is that also including fantastic elements, or is that a larger portion of that game, the role-playing game, based on history as opposed
Both.
to fantasy?
It's definitely gonna be both. Tristan is doing a class in school where they're learning more about the Spanish literature and the invasion of Mexico. So they are kind of the perfect person to write this game and also give more people more information about these people, but also incorporate the fantasy element to it. And the reason to do this was, I think comic books, like whenever a comic book comes out, a week later it's considered old, and it doesn't really give you much of a reason to go back to it. It's more of a collectible item.
Right.
So I wanted this to be interactive. Like I'm hoping if we hit our stretch goal that I want to print the map on the inside front cover, so you have to tear the pages out and place your miniatures and play the game on the comic.
Oh, that's really cool and innovative. Is that something that you've seen done before, or
I haven't seen it done
pretty original
before.
to you? Yeah.
I am also one of those kinds of people that likes to fold my comic books up, tuck them in my back pocket with my bubble gum and baseball cards, and ride down to Dr. Pepper's corner store and say hi to Atticus Rex or Atticus Finch. You know, like I hate keeping comics like perfect. I want people to destroy the artifact. I want them to use it so much that they tear the pages out, use the game, like the cover as a game board. And
now we don't record this live, but I hear people screaming right now. Parts breaking, windows.
The other reason why is it makes it more collectible. Like whenever someone picks up this comic, they're going to say, "Did you tear out pages? Is the pages still in the comic?" You know, like you've got to buy more than one. One to be a board, and the other one so you can read and be able to DM and play the game.
Right. Yeah. And then it also is like a badge of honor. Like, yeah, I ripped off my page because I wanted to play the game.
Yeah. No, I want to destroy this collectible market, and this is my first attempt.
I like it. Is there some deeper philosophy that you have that guided that decision and, you know, that sort of comment?
When I was a kid, I used to really love putting my comics everywhere so my family can read them, but they never did. And one day I got my sister, I was like, "Hey, I just read this amazing comic where Bane breaks Batman's back. You should check it out." And she grabbed it and threw it behind her. And the comic exploded in a comical fashion, like it was in a Looney Tunes.
Did a bird fly through
it was like, Randy Johnson throwing that pitch and the ball exploding the bird. That's exactly what happened to this comic. And I was devastated. My sister was like impressed with herself that she could do something so cool. And it's something that we always harp back on. But ever since then, I kind of lost um, any hope of keeping these things in pristine value.
Yeah, I collected comics a little bit growing up, and um, collected other things over the course of the years. And most recently, I established some small collection of SH Figuarts Kamen Rider figures from Japan.
Mm.
And yeah, at some point, my brother made a comment that always still resonates with me today, which is you're just collecting Pokemon, and they're never going to stop making Pokemon. They're
That's
going to move
true.
the eyes, to a different part of the head, and the ears will rotate. They'll slightly change the color, and boom, they have a new Pokemon to
I'm a
catch.
big fan of Batman, so like I will always see a Batman action figure and have to think twice before buying it because they'll never stop making them, and I will always want to buy one. So I could see you're wearing like a Japanese shirt. Is that something that you really dig, like Japanese culture and art? And
I do, yeah. I lived in Japan a total of 2 years, and I speak
oh wow,
relatively well. And I've mostly, I would say, my real heart of interest in Japanese media is in film. But I also, watch anime, read manga, and the like. This one is actually, and I texted my friend before I got on. He is a Chinese American guy, and he got this for me when he was living. I think he was visiting his family in Hong Kong when he was living in China for a bit. But I've been meaning to wear it to a podcast
oh
because
there you go.
it's comic inspired, and it's yeah, I think I want to say it's Chinese, but I don't think it's mainland China
Hmm.
comic. It might be either Taiwan or Hong Kong.
So why'd you come back?
Um,
You had no choice. Was it one of those like?
yeah, a mixture of both. So the last stint, I was there for a year teaching English, and I intended on staying for quite a while, 3 years, in that position. And I was in a very rural area, which, afforded me good opportunities to uh, get exposure to parts of the culture that I would not have otherwise dreamed of experiencing. But at the same time, it was a little bit lonely. It was like being in, a pretty isolated part of the States, like Appalachia or something, where you don't really quite fit in. And there's not too many people around in general to interact with. And
Wow,
one reason I started the podcast is because I do like interacting with people and getting new
interesting. Where are you
perspectives.
now?
I am speaking with you via North Carolina,
There you
and
go.
I come by way of New York.
Love
Yeah.
New York. Never been to North Carolina. Hope to visit someday.
If you ever do, let's hang out. Yeah, I'm in
I
the
hear the
Raleigh.
barbecue is good.
It is, yeah, and they, I think no matter where you go in the country, they tout their barbecue as the best. And North Carolina has a clear vinegar versus tomato-based barbecue
Oh
sauce
wow.
division. Pretty hotly contested, and I have yet I have yet to claim a side. I still just pull out my
You're
newcomer
neutral.
card.
Yeah, New
Yeah,
Yorker. There you go.
yeah. So are you in Los Angeles? You're in
Yeah, I
California
live
now?
in Los Angeles. I'm about 10 minutes away from Universal Studios, so I see Hogwarts peeking out from my bedroom window sometimes.
Oh wow, on a clear day.
Yeah, I mean it's better on a rainy, foggy day because then it looks pretty authentic.
And how long have you? So did you grow up in Arizona?
I'm born and raised Tucson, Arizona. I moved out to Los Angeles 5 years ago. I wanted to. My friends, they were the producers of Talking with Gods, the Grant Morrison documentary, and director and filmtographers, and they wanted to do their own feature length film. And I had a foot on either LA or New York, and they said, we have a job for you on a film shoot for 3 weeks. Come work with us. And I'm very grateful that they took a shot. And I made some really amazing friends on that film shoot that I will talk to hopefully for the rest of my life, all amazing people. So I decided to stay because at that time, DC Comics was moving to Burbank. Boom Studios is out here. Webtoon, um, Black Mask, like a lot of publishers. So I saw some potential to work in the comic book industry. So I decided to stay and got a job with Top Cow Productions in 2016, and I'm very grateful that they took a shot with me.
And what was your experience in, I guess we could rewind and kind of do a biography from when you were in Arizona, what you were doing,
In
if
Arizona,
comics
so
were a
oh
dream of
yeah,
yours.
oh
And
totally. I mean, I've always loved comic books. I've been ever since I was a child, I would beg my parents. I would look in the back of Wizard or other comics and look for comic book stores listed in Tucson, and I would beg my parents to take me there. Back when I was a kid, comic books were being sold at gas stations or liquor stores, like along with Archie's and other periodicals and tabloids. So I would go and read random stuff that weren't, I mean, it was just all, they were all bent and wet. Maybe that's why I don't really care for the condition of comics, because when you're at
because
like
they
a
were
liquor,
already
yeah,
in poor
people
condition
would
when you got
fold
them.
them in half to see what was behind. So I decided to, I used to draw and write my own stuff. And then I was in journalism in middle school and high school. I had zero interest in academics, and it wasn't until my junior year, my high school history teacher, Mr. Johnson, introduced he had introduced to me Mouse by Art Spiegelman, and used the comic book, the graphic novel,
Right.
as a way to teach us about the Holocaust. And I had never been so engaged in school, so that really changed everything for me.
I remember having a similar experience with Barefoot Gen, which is a Japanese manga about the bombing of Hiroshima with the atomic
Yeah,
bomb. If
yeah,
you
beautiful
haven't,
comic.
yeah, you read that. Yeah, that one.
Yeah,
Still, I just got a chill thinking about some of
it's
the
amazing.
really,
I
really,
can never forget the art. I mean,
yeah,
it's
exactly. It's really, and I'm making air quotes for people who are just listening, simplistic. But man, there's beauty in simplicity sometimes, and you
yeah,
don't need a lot of detail to convey a horrifying image.
definitely. So that always stuck with me. And then I became a bill collector at 17 years old. It ran in the family. My mother was a bill collector and got me a job at her work, and I needed to work full time because my parents had got divorced, and my mom had substance abuse issues. So we needed someone else to help her with her habit and keep bills paid. And my sister, in school, so that was important. I ended up graduating a year early, working full time through my senior year, and then I got a job at City Mortgage as a as a bill collector, teaching them how to collect money, because at the time, all those people working there in collections never had to learn how to pursue people to pay their mortgage. People always just paid their mortgage, and the loss on that was pretty low. But when there was that financial crash with all the
2008, 9.
banks, 2008, I then started working for their loan modification department for 4 years, and that I was making pretty good money for a barely high school graduate, and I was using that money to travel to different comic book conventions and become more connected in the industry. I helped co-organize the Tucson Comic Con. I was a social media manager at the Phoenix Comic Con. Then I started writing about comics on a news aspect, writing for comicsbeat.com for Heidi McDonald. And we were a great team. It was me, Laura Senden, Heidi McDonald, Steve Morris, Zanab. who's running Short Box Comics, one of like the most prestigious indie comic book publishers out there. And I think we did really well. And I was very lucky to have worked with so many different writers. And
So
then,
that whole time, if you don't mind me jumping in, did you have, when you were collecting mortgages and graduating high school, did you always have in the back of your mind, like, I'm going to do comics?
yeah, when I was 18
Yeah.
years old, I worked with a political cartoonist named Arnie Bermudez, and we created this comic called El Loco. It was about a superhero that fought the chupacabra and racial profiling. And every time he tried to fight crime, um, immigration would come and try to arrest him. And then I started writing comics with my best friend, Christian Valer. We did an anthology story for a Smiths anthology based on comics by Morrissey and the Smiths. And we had done that. And then I had worked on a comic called Captain Unicorn with him. And then I started writing more about comics because a mixture of, 10 years ago, comic book publishers weren't as keen as they are now with working with minority comic book creators. So it was a little harder to get their attention and get their respect. And it's interesting now. Some of these publishers, know who I am, and some of my favorite cartoonists work with me. So I'm very lucky. But yeah, comics. I knew I wanted to make comics, and that's my passion. And before moving to Tucson, I was freelance. So just to finish my life story, I was
Yeah.
so I worked for the bank, and then my ex-girlfriend's sister worked at the Arizona Daily Star, and she got put in a good word for me. So I was able to start working as a journalist with no formal education. And then I got a really good job at the Tucson Weekly, which was an alternative weekly that was more that had less corporate overlords until they were bought out. So I lost that job, and then I became a freelance writer, and I was working with this food blog, and this guy named Adam was interested in hiring me as like an editor, as like someone who would run his website for him. And he asked me, like, what do you want to do? And my first answer to that question, after having been a collector, a banker, a journalist, an editor, a writer. And then he was like, what do you want to do? I was like, I want to make comic books. And he goes, go make comic books. Like, do what you want to do, and do what you love. And I sat there realizing I hadn't, and I wanted to pursue that. So moving to Los Angeles really helped accelerated that.
Yeah. So did you have a portfolio, over that course of time that you were working these various jobs, not writing comics? Were you
I
writing
had
comics
my
on the
own, so
sly?
I had co-published an anthology called Countdown Until Now, which was people that went to this comic book convention that honored Grant Morrison, and we all had done an anthology together. And that's all I really wanted to show, was I was able to write, I was able to edit, I could publish, I knew how to put a professional product out there. And during my interview with Matt Hawkins, he had told me after the fact that he didn't plan on hiring me because of my resume. It didn't have any comic book experience. Until I gave him the graphic novel, he then realized that I was serious and I could do what he needed me to do. And they didn't really know what they wanted me to do. So I just said, I can do press, I can do fulfillment, I can write, I can do whatever you need that you are doing, I can do that for you. And now I'm the director of operations, and I'm very lucky that I've worked this hard, and I have these opportunities to work with Top Cow and Image Comics, which is a prestigious comic book publisher in at least North America.
Well, I only just met you, but don't say you're lucky for working hard. That's, that was entirely up to you. I think
Right.
maybe there's some luck in the opportunity, but you worked to put
Yeah.
yourself in a position to take advantage of it, it sounds
Thank
like.
you.
So congratulations. I'm going to say congratulations on your work thus far. And, we're certainly looking forward to
Thanks,
all
Kevin.
future success. It sounds like I'm winding down the podcast, but we're just getting warmed up. So The Helm Grey Castle is correct me if I'm wrong, 32 page, 30.
Altogether, it's 32 pages.
Okay.
That's with comic and game. Hopefully, I mean, if we have to do more pages, sure, but I'm trying to keep it down.
Any specific particular reason why you try to
It's
keep the page
cheaper.
count down?
Yeah, it's
Yeah,
cheaper.
I
Cheaper to
fig-
print.
I figured,
Also,
but I didn't want to put words in your
right.
mouth.
Yeah. No, it's the less, the better. But for something like this, a number one can be a little bit more beefier, I think. And we also have plans on doing another game for the next issue. And Tristan, I hope, is we had talked about this, but to do some kind of more academic literature on some key people during the Spanish invasion. And if you haven't already, but in La Voz De M.A.Y.O, there is a very amazing introduction written by Frederick Aldama, who is one of the leading Latinx comic book authors and somebody who's just always out there promoting Latinx comic creators. So he had done me a huge favor. And so I do want to keep this tradition of having educators and people much smarter than me explaining what I'm doing is a little bit more high concept than what you would get out of a Batman Wonder Woman comic, which are there's nothing wrong with those books, but I want to give somebody there. I can't compete with them, so I want to give you something that you can't get anywhere else.
Well, and in terms of, you know, speaking of Barefoot Gen and his comics that tell a story and a history and fill in the blanks for people who may not otherwise, you know, have a textbook or have the education to expose them to
Exactly.
that history. And so I think that's, you know, a really valuable thing that you're doing. And I
Thank you.
haven't been able to read Tata Rambo, but I was interested to read a little bit about it. And it seems like a great, so now we're kind of going back in time to your last work that was inspired by your great grandfather or your grandfather.
Yeah, my great grandfather Ramon Jauregui.
Yeah. And it seems like, you know, you were intimately blood related to a participant in some of those events, but also I get the feeling that there was a depth of history there that required you to do a pretty significant amount of research.
Yes.
And so, you know, for creative people who are, you know, if we're speaking to somebody who has an idea that's based on some history that they want to illuminate, you know, talk us through how you approach a higher level concept that is rooted in history and you want to do justice to the actual facts.
So in one of the early lessons I learned working for the Arizona Daily Star was there's a saying in the newsroom, if your mother says she loves you, get a second source. So as much as I love my family and as much as I want to believe my family, it was important for me to go the extra 100-yard dash and figure out some things about my great grandfather that weren't either privy to them or, just, we all have history. We all have things that we are not proud of. We all have things that we, have done that we wish we could do over again. And one of those things about my great grandfather. So just to preference this, Su La Voz is about Ramon Jauregui, who was a World War II veteran, a Chicano activist that helped one of the last Native American tribes get federal recognition. There are tribes out in the United States that are considered Mexicans because they do not have treaty rights or they didn't have an advocate like my great grandfather. And the organization he co-founded, M.A.Y.O, and it stands for Mexican American Yaqui and others, they had led the fight to get them recognized. And they worked with Morris K. Udall, the Democratic congressman who went out of his way to help not only the Pasco Yaqui tribe, but the Hono Atom tribe, and was a beloved figure by Native Americans. And I had done this research 40 to 50 years later. A lot of these people had passed away. A lot of them were very old, didn't really remember anything. A lot of their kids were disinterested and didn't really care. So I had to go to the local church, talk to people, go into people's houses, talk to them about their experiences with my great grandfather, talk to them about the tribe, also call the tribe. And I had a meeting with Congressman Raul Grijalva, who's who'll probably go down as one of the most important congressmen in Arizona history for fighting the environment, which impacts directly the Native Americans here. He's been always a supporter of them, and talking to him because he had got his start with in politics with my great grandfather. My great Ramon helped Grijalva run for a TUSD seat and helped him establish his status in Tucson, Arizona, as someone that we can all trust. But also, while I was writing this, the Me Too movement had become huge, and it was very important discussion. And one of the things I always knew about him growing up was that he cheated on my great grandmother, and they had got a divorce. And I wanted to have that conversation in the graphic novel because a lot of the times when you're reading about someone like Mahatma Gandhi, and he had slept with his cousin who was underage, and was it was so that he wouldn't be tempted by the woman or whatever. And then you had Martin Luther King, who's someone I've looked up to my entire life. He had cheated on his wife, and it's one of those things I wanted to kind of talk about and also address. My great grandfather was always out of town. He was always working. He was always helping the community, and he lost his mother to a stroke, and he lost his father to exposure to mustard gas in World War One. So what is a person like that, how do they find love? And when their family is upset with them all the time because he's never home, and when he finally meets somebody who respects what he's doing, who understands what he's doing, I can only, in my head, think that he would want to have more of a relationship with that kind of person. So that was something I wanted to address, and also separate myself from what I was trying to say and do with the graphic novel, and not correct history, because it really breaks my heart when the tribe doesn't recognize their efforts, and when the city of Tucson excludes the brown people that helped create what we know now as Tucson and solidify the tribe and its culture and its people. Also, like, why wouldn't this be documented, and why wouldn't this be public information?
Interesting. Yeah. Was that at all a difficult conversation for you to have within your family?
Yeah, because they're very bitter about it. So they were very angry every time we talk about it, and there was not a lot of love for the city or the tribe. So I had to, as much as I could, objectively remove myself and become a journalist and say, what's going on here? And and at a certain point, I kept creating more questions with every answer I got. So I had to stop and just go with what
Right.
I had, or I would have just still be working on it to this day.
Yeah, and that's a concept I've visited with other guests on this podcast, killing your darlings or killing your babies when you have a creative endeavor that is so all encompassing. You accumulate so many ideas, even if it's fictional, you have sub stories and subplots that you want to include, but sometimes they just don't fit in. And I guess in your case, you're writing a comic, you're limited by page number, and you have to choose sometimes what goes in and what doesn't. And I guess in your case, where to stop your investigating.
Yeah. And the other reason why I hired an editor was she's based in England, and she does not care about American history. She's not related to my great grandfather. She has I respect her opinions for regarding the medium and her critique of comics. So I wanted someone that could grab the script, tell me what's good and what's bad, and how can we make this better, and what doesn't make sense. And I'm very grateful Claire Napier was was able to help me with that, and she's working with me on my new book, Helm Grey Castle.
Yeah, very, very cool. And how do you go about, meeting somebody like Claire and assembling a ensemble caster, a team that you can trust and people who have a clear understanding of your vision.
So with Helm Grey Castle, the colorist, Brian Valenza, emailed me and said, "Hey, I really like what you're doing. I want to work with you. Do you have any creator-owned ideas? Because I have a studio of artists here in Jakarta." And I said, "Of course. What do your artists want to do?" So he sent me superhero, fantasy, and another like a children's story. And I had sent him all these scripts. He had found, or he works with Ramat Handoko, who is an incredible artist, and I was blown away. And he had colored the pages, and I was at a lunch meeting with my coworkers, and I said, "Hey, check out this book I'm working on," just nonchalantly. Like, here's Brian, and we're all fans. Everybody at the company is fans of Brian Valenza. And I was like, "Look how good he is." And they were like, "This is beautiful. Like, what are you doing with this?" And I was like, "I don't know yet." And they were like, "Well, you got to get on it." So, so with that interest, I realized, and then I started showing some industry friends around, like, "Hey, what do you think of these books?" And they loved everything that Brian was helping me make. But because of my D&D schedule and my like love for that, and I'm starting to see more stories like this pop up, I don't want to seem like a copycat. So I definitely want to be on the front lines when it comes to fantasy, um, Mexican American stories. So then I started working with Brian and Ramat. And then my friend Gabby Downey, who's working at DC, she lettered Harleen. She's lettered the new Beast Boy YA graphic novel. She did the new Punchline comic. She does a lot of work at DC. She's a Latina comic book creator, and we are both very sick and tired of how brown creators are being treated or not even thought of when it comes to making comics. And so I wanted to work with someone who's very passionate about getting more inclusive, making a more inclusive environment for not just Latinx and Latina creators, but for everybody. Uh, and she's an amazing letterer. So she's working on the book. And then my friend Matt Emmons, who I met at Boston Comic Con. You know, you meet a lot of people at conventions, and I was hanging out with my friends Michael Conrad and Becky Clunan, and they said, "Yeah, our friend Matt is going to join us." And he was this like 21-year-old kid, and he reminded me of me 10 years ago. You know, I'm 31, so remember this kid who's nervous, funny, uh, wicked talented, as they would say in Boston. Um, and I like what he's doing. So I asked him, "Hey, can you draw me a cover?" And he just did it within a week, and I was impressed with what he did. And that's the Kickstarter variant. And and then I asked my favorite cartoonist of all time, David Lapham, who's famous for creating Stray Bullets with his wife Maria Lapham. He won an Eisner for Lodger, and he's drawn and he's written Batman and Punisher and Spider-Man, and he's my idol. And I had emailed him, since we're pretty tight, not tight, but we're like, we're not best friends, but we're gonna get there someday. He doesn't know it yet.
You heard it here first.
So I emailed him, asked him, "Hey, I want to send you money if you can draw me a cover," and he said yes. And that made my 2020, you know.
Yeah.
And then I wanted a game, and I was working with my friend Jeffrey Golden, who's a hilarious person, who had him and his wife Amanda Meadows, the founders of Devastator Press. They were, I mean, I'm a fan of their Kickstarter fantasy they did of, I don't know if you've ever seen Wet Hot American Summer, but they did a role-playing video
No.
game for that, or a role-playing book for that. It's very funny, and if you like the movies and the shows, you definitely should check it out. And they're just funny people, and I really love them. And they had encouraged me to reach out to Tristan because Tristan's Latinx, Afro Latinx, I think, and we had a conversation, and I told them what I was looking for, and within that same conversation, we were already settled on what we were going to do. So it was just
This is very natural.
yeah, I was very grateful for that, and I'm hoping with the stretch goal, Jeffrey has now written a D&D game, and he's a lot more comfortable with doing it. So we're hoping to reach that point. And then what else? I mean, for La Voz, my boss, Matt Hawkins, told me to work with Jay Gonzo, who's someone I knew from the Arizona circuit, and he is an incredible
And I love
storyteller.
his personal touch. And I did have a question if your selection of artists and collaborators is based on a certain image you have for the story in your mind. And I mean, I haven't read that comic, but when I looked at the images on the Kickstarter page that I guess is from a year or maybe 2 years ago, I was just blown away how it kind of resonated with the theme of the story for me, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And I guess I wonder if the selection of the artists is, you have a very conscious image in your head, and then you pursue an artist who you think is going to be able to create that image.
Honestly, I am more of a, and when it comes to craft in comics, I'm more interested in storytelling. So art style to me can be anything. Like I can work with anything as long as you and or I like to look at making comics like jazz. Like I'm throwing a sheet of music at you, and can you hit these beats? And if you can hit these beats and you can understand what I'm trying to do on a technical level, I don't care if you are using Crayola, I don't care if you're using watercolor. I don't care if you're using vector art. I don't care if you're using all Photoshop. I don't care if you're using photo references. As long as we can jam and hit that emotional beat with the technical aspect of what I think the medium can do, art style is not as important to me.
Interesting. So how much direction do you give? I mean, now going back to Helm Grey Castle, in terms of an artifact, because you're representing a culture through fantasy,
Right.
Mesoamerican culture through fantasy. How do you, or what level of detail and direction do you give an artist about, particular artifacts in a certain page?
I'm pretty good at using references, and they see what reference I'm talking about. So I'm not, I try to be an easy collaborator when it comes to art. Um, I'll have some requests when it comes to making the page have a little bit more mood when it comes to coloring, or when there would be some times where the artist, for an example, in one of my future comics that I'm working on, someone is grappling the hero, and he is holding her, and she kicks him between the legs, and he has a gun in his hand, and he shoots the other guy next to them. So my note, it was too stiff, and I wanted a little bit more like, well, the beautiful thing about comics is everything's in one action. So that one action is either like, if I'm going to hit you in the face, I'm like here, or I've already hit you in the face. So I want, that's my favorite
So it's
thing.
either the cock up or the
Yeah.
extended
Or
fist that's
yeah,
already
you already,
past the boom bow.
you don't see the execution because the connection between your mind and your eye and the voice in your head, because comics and, manga read in your head, unless you're like me and you read everything out loud and annoy everyone. Um, that's the beauty of it. So I love the beauty of that marriage between what, like, you know, the kicking of the groin. Like everyone knows what that feels like. Me especially.
And yeah, it's creator's choice, right? So that's the
Yeah,
direction that you would give. Is it the cock back before the punch, or is it, right after the delivery?
exactly.
Cool. That's a good illustration.
And with Lavos, my only note for the art was I want the color scheme to be all of every scene is during a Tucson sunset, unless it's nighttime. There's one
Nice.
morning shot, majority sunsets, three late shots,
Yeah.
and Tucson I think has the best sunsets in the world. Arizona, at least southern Arizona, just the way the mountains cascade, the desert, and everything. That's why when you see the Arizona's flag, it's the sunset.
Right.
And just like with Japan, you have that beautiful red
Right.
sun.
Yeah. A lot of beautiful sunsets I've seen there as well. Um, Very cool. So how long do we think, you know, when you're creating a first issue,
Mm-hmm.
how many issues out do you plan for? Is there like a bigger vision? Speaking specifically about Helm Grey Castle.
So I am a self-taught student of the comic book industry. And there is, when your first issue comes out, that's when you get the most orders. That's when you get the most, unless you're The Walking Dead. Unless you're The Walking Dead, your first issue is a typical, it used to be 10, now it's creeping into the 8s and the 7s. But like someone like myself, you're hitting a 10,000 unit number one. So you have 10,000 copies out there. Your second issue is looking at a 50 to 70% decrease. So you're looking at 6,000 to 7,000, maybe 5,000. Third issue, you're looking at 5 to 4,000. Fourth issue, you're looking at 3 to 4,000, or 4 to 3,000. Anything after the fourth issue, you have to be The Walking Dead to bring it back up to as far as independent comics. I'm not talking about like Marvel and DC. So,
And is this totally based on your own experience, or this is like an industry standard established? This is what
this
people
is
talk
my
about.
personal belief on the industry.
Okay. Yeah, that's valuable information.
So, I want my first comic book to come out, and I want to do a 4-issue miniseries. If let's just say there is more love and more demand for Helm Greycastle after 4 issues, I'm down to do it. If not, I have another idea and another idea and another idea. But if I have my choice, I'd rather do graphic novels because comic book stores, there's less comic book stores than there are bookstores, and there are more libraries than there are bookstores. And and La Voz De M.A.Y.O, I found out last week, is being sold at the Smithsonian's bookshop.
I think I saw that on your Twitter. Congratulations.
Thank
That's
you.
another accomplishment.
And one of why I'm so excited about that is more people go to the Smithsonian for educational purposes than they are going to go to a comic book store. So it's just a place where educators, librarians, parents, grandparents, where they're going to see something and they're going to want to buy something for their kids or for, to pass on that knowledge or keepsake.
And also
there's not a lot of,
recognize that comics could be educational tools.
yeah.
Like we talked about earlier.
Exactly. So my goal is to be in more places that people go to, and like my graphic novel is available on Target, Best Buy, Barnes and Noble, Amazon. And when you sell one issue of a comic, it's not as accessible. It's more collectible.
Right.
But I do
That's
want the monthly
perspective for sure.
grind. I want to experience that, and I want to also show everyone I can do it.
Right. Are there any creators out there? I'm, kind of a novice, and I'm learning a lot about comics through this podcast, which is a podcast for creatives in general, but a lot of people who are doing comics. I mean, everybody who's doing comics are creative, and I've had the, pleasure of speaking with many of them so far. Do any comic creators jump right into a graphic novel and skip the issue phase?
Yes. Yes, because they are an established person, they have a following, or they are working with a major publisher like Random House or Penguin, that has an infrastructure that goes to like New York Times and all the reviewers and all. You get invited on podcasts, and there is like a major machine, like a Scholastic book fair at every school. Like that makes sense. It's becoming more routine in the comic book industry, which I'm thankful for, because I think also the profit margin's much better. I mean, this comic I'm making is going to cost me $10,000 to make, and I'm only charging $5 for it. So it's more of a volume. I need
Yeah, you
more
need the volume
people.
to make the
Yeah.
margin and make any.
Yeah. So when La Voz De M.A.Y.O comes out, it's 16.90. I was able to offer this on this Kickstarter and say, hey, if you didn't buy the 3 issues, and if you didn't buy it from me because that's the only way you know me, here's a $16 graphic novel plus a $5, $10 comic. You could buy the other issues. The Kickstarter variant is worth $10 because it's going through Kickstarter, and enough people in my network love me enough to help me make this reality. So they're more inclined to pay a little bit more for something like this. And there is a one-shot D&D game. That is, I think, $10 on its own.
Yeah, I think that's a lot of added value.
Yeah.
I spoke with Jeff Johnson, who is having his first comic was successfully funded on Kickstarter, a day or two ago. And it's based in fantasy. And he had a really huge world and mapped out concept with lands and worlds, kind of like Lord of the Rings. So how expansive is the universe in your head for the Helm Grey Castle?
It's based in reality, except for the Lord of the Rings-esque part.
Okay.
So
the map is the map of
the world
as it is, right?
The Spanish are coming from Spain. They are coming for gold. They do not get the gold. So when Spain doesn't hear back, what happens now?
Heads are going to roll, but whose heads?
Whose heads? Exactly. So I can't wait to explore that option, and also have this other realm of fantasy, and have this, like, this mass of the United States, but as what if the United States was a fantasy area?
Right, with different groups of people.
Mm-hmm.
So are you expanding not only geographically into Mesoamerican tribe concepts and groups, but also groups that were existing in North America prior to colonization?
Yes.
Interesting. And is that gonna be tied into the first issue, or do we have to wait for
It's going
subsequent
to
issues?
it's subsequent issues because we're going to learn more about the adventures as time goes on. Yeah, so Helm Greycastle is this Conan king with no home, and his wife Vola. They have a child together, so human half orc kind of thing. And this half orc is this their child. They're two good people, and their child is chaotic good, and they don't know what to do with this kid, but they have this kid, and their families don't approve of this marriage, so they're trying to find their own place. Oscar Frostbeard is the son of a royal family, but was outcast for who he loves, and he's in a same-sex relationship, and they're both trying to find a place where they can exist together without being judged. And then you have Shava, who has lost her voice to a wench, and the only way she can communicate is through song and music. And it's like I don't know if you are a fan of Star Wars, or like everyone can understand BB-8 or R2D2, but the audience can't. So she just speaks in music, and everyone can respond to her in that way. So I can't wait to explore that fun kind of trait within comics, and use like music as a way to let people know what's happening.
Yeah, so is there going to be a music tie-in, like actual performing like tracks that you can
That's the
listen
hope.
to supplement the?
Yeah, that's
Yeah,
the
that
hope.
sounds a very multimedia approach that you're taking. I
Yeah,
like that.
she's an old folk hero who was in a band, and when she lost her voice, they kicked her out of the band. So she's this like traveling musician, and finds these other people that are also kind of without a home. And when they come to Mexico, they start to kind of see themselves in this world, like, hey, maybe we can live here, you know.
Right.
So they're inadvertently gentrifying Mexico, but in a
I,
way that just like helps everybody.
yeah, I like the various layers of exploring diversity and it sounds like there's more than one personal story that you're interweaving into the narrative, and I very
Yeah,
much appreciate those types of stories, along with
everybody.
the history.
Yeah, everybody. So that's the thing. Like these people they want something. Every character they need to want something.
Right.
They all, and in the core, they want to feel at home.
Right. And then, conflict. So when I was in college, I studied conflict resolution and mediation. And one of the techniques you use in mediation to resolve conflict, interpersonal conflict between people, is to recognize each person's interest. What do they want? Like you said. And when those interests or wants actually conflict is when you have true conflict. The hope when you're trying to mediate is to come to the realization that the interests aren't mutually exclusive, and that they're actually not conflicting. There was just a misunderstanding and assumption that there was conflict. And it's interesting to hear you talk about this, because my reading between the lines is that this is a approach you take to story writing, that you need to establish a want for each character, and write the story at least partially based on that want. Am
How
I
do we get
right
to
in that
yes?
assumption?
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
all about how we get to yes.
Yeah, which is the title of a mediation book. I'm
It
not sure
is.
if you're. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you're
Oh, I
quoting
know.
that directly.
I am. It is how I've lived my life. Definitely. I mean, it's like everything's negotiation.
Right,
You and
right.
I emailing back and forth at what time we were going to do this. We got to yes, and here we are.
Yep. Yeah.
And
Yeah,
then being a
that's
bill
cool.
collector was taught me a certain way of gift of gab. I was 17 years old asking people for their bank information to pay their bills? How do I get you to agree to me to give me your financial information from someone you barely even know? I was 17 years old. I didn't even have a bank.
What's the crash course in getting? Maybe you shouldn't reveal that.
What? No, I'll reveal. Well, yeah, I don't. It's not magic. I hate magic. I want to know how that trick was done. So I'll spill. I'll sing like a canary.
So how do you get to yes? What are your key points that you've learned over the course of your various
He,
careers and coming into the comic book industry?
a lot of it is everyone wants to feel like they're being listened to. They want that true engagement because everyone feels alone and they don't know if they're getting it or not. So, even at home, you don't know if your wife or your significant other is listening to you. You always know your kids aren't listening to you. Your parents don't understand you. So when you hear a voice that's spitting back what you're saying, who's compromising, a lot of it's compromise on my end. It's like, well, my boss isn't going to let you pay half. Can you pay 75%? One of those things is, a lot of the times when you're selling something, and if you got them, that's the only time you're ever going to get them. The likelihood of them coming back to buy something is 0 to none. As soon as I got your attention, I want to give you the ability to buy this right now. So when people listen to your podcasts, they're going to look up Helm Grey Castle on Kickstarter right now, and they're going to buy it, or they're going to find it in their store, hopefully, eventually. So it's always always be closing. You got that coffees for closers. You gotta close the deal. How do I get you to say yes? How do I get you to agree that my book, Helm Grey Castle, is for your shelf and for your attention? And if 2020 hasn't taught us anything, the time is precious, and we've all spent it alone, and we've all spent it wondering and remembering and clinging to that nostalgia of like wanting to be back to normal when there is no normal coming. This isn't normal. This shouldn't be the new normal. Getting back to any way of the way the world used to be in your mind is very far from it. So I hope Helm Grey Castle provides that escape. So it's I love negotiation. Someone said, I think the guy who wrote How Do We Get to Yes is negotiation is like jazz. It's improvisation on a theme. Everything you say, I'm going to try to keep the conversation rolling and try to keep it interesting. And I think, music has a lot to do with it. And I'm lucky I have timing and that I have a, very basic understanding of music theory. So I always try to incorporate it in my comics along with negotiation and getting people to say, yes, I will buy this weird comic. Will you stop bothering me?
How does music, explain to me how music theory, how you use that in comic writing and creation? And
so comics are read. I mean, people talk about comics as page count, but it's more about panel count. And panels are like notes. Each panel hits you a certain way. So if you got, 4 panels going across the page, it's almost like a piano key. You know what I mean? If you got, I work as a big splash or a double page splash, and then we go into a 6 to 8 panel grid. And it's a back and forth. And the way you look at a panel, there is in Voz De M.A.Y.O, there's a double page spread, and everyone attributes the 9-panel grid to Alan Moore, but it was something that was done before him. But now it's something that everyone attributes to Tom King and Mitch Gerrits. I wanted to do the 9-panel grid, but better than them. So me and Gonzo have this whole grid that you read each page right to left, but you can look at it from left left page to the right page, and it's a whole scene. And on the right page, on the second page, there is a line that goes down the middle of the page. And because you're reading from left to right, excuse me, that's what I meant earlier, left to right. Um, that third page, that second panel out of the 3 row, if you look at it straight down, it's a kinetic action. Like this person's lighting up a cigar, smoking the cigar, all within those 3 panels.
So it's like a meta kind of look at
Animation.
the panelization.
Yeah.
Panel, I don't know the correct term, but
Right.
compilation of panels on the page.
Exactly. So if you got someone that can feel what you're dropping and can hit those beats, it's like music to me. I mean, that's what music looks like.
Right. Yeah, I like that idea of improvisation and working with your collaborators in that way.
Yeah. I like, I put down a script and I send it to them. And then I always tell them, if you can find a way to do this better, please do it better. I will not tell you how to draw. I just only want you to just bring it up. So that when it's time to drop the reader, then they're gonna feel it.
Yeah, I think that's an important point for listeners and creative folks to take away from this is, if you're collaborating with people, let them do their work, let them do their art. And, you could give some advice here and there, but, they know what they do best typically. Yeah.
Oh,
So
yeah.
don't get in their way. I have a buddy who has a tattoo, and he negotiated with the artist to like do it slightly different than the artist intended. And I don't remember if it was the colors or the line or the position, but regardless, at the end of the day, years later, he looks at the tattoo and he's like, I should have just let them do it how they intended and, initially wanted to.
Yeah. I'm not an artist, I can't draw, so I'm not going to tell someone how to draw. And if I have an important, and I think everything, especially in comics, if you're asking an artist to do something, it has to service the story. If you're asking them to move the character in a certain way on the panel, oh, I don't really like them walking that way. Well, why don't you like them walking that way? Are they walking into a fire? Are they walking into a coffee shop? Are they walking in on their wife with another man or woman or person? Like, there has to be a reason why you're asking them to draw this differently, so that next panel, it's like they're walking into this and they're reacting to this,
right.
That's to me.
Less stylistic. And if you have a request, it should be intentional, have some
Yeah.
intention to it.
Or draw it yourself. If you don't like it, you know what I mean? That's my, there is a difference between like maybe an artist kind of phoning it in, maybe they're not having a great day. There could be those moments, but even then, unless you can draw, you're at their mercy.
Right. Interesting. You touched on it briefly, I think, when you were talking, I think, about the Indonesian colorist, and you mentioned that they proposed 3 directions to move forward with you, be it a superhero comic, a fantasy comic, or a comic oriented for children. And my laying that groundwork that you touched on it briefly, I'd like to explore a little bit more, why this comic? One of the questions I like to ask my guests is, I'm assuming you have more than one idea. To bring one idea to life is a heck of a lot of work. You're running a Kickstarter right now. That's not an easy endeavor. Takes a lot of work, a lot of time, a lot of sleepless nights. So why and how Helm Grey Castle? And why not another idea that you might have, tucked away on your shelf or written up on a file on your computer?
Why Helm Grey Castle is because I want to do something that challenges what everyone loves. Everyone loves fantasy. And I love to have the conversation about introducing a different element. Why why is it that dragons are real but there are no black people in Lord of the Rings? Why is that not a why are there goblins? Why when you put on a ring you see a different element but there's no Asian people? Like what is going on here? Um, my goal is to have a difficult conversation. Are having that conversation right now in a very unfortunate circumstance when someone of color is killed on the streets, typically by law enforcement. And when we have these conversations are very passionate, and you're either picking one side or the other. So I want to inadvertently make people who love this genre ask themselves, oh, why hasn't this been done before? You know, and when you look at your shelf, like my shelf, like, why aren't I reading things by people of color? Why aren't more books or comics being published by people of color in different in genders or, non-conforming, non-binary people? So I want to, but I also want them to enjoy themselves and have a fantasy story that they love and that calls back on these stories in a different way. And the art is amazing. I mean, it's probably like, everyone loves the art. There is not a single person that has told me, oh, that's not my thing.
Not for me. Yeah. No.
If you look at my
That's awesome.
Goodreads reviews on Voz De M.A.Y.O, there are people that say this book is for just for people that he is writing about. They're saying
I
that
don't agree. I don't think you were writing
exactly.
about me.
They're like this comic is only for people that are only Mexican American, that are only Native American. And I wanted to make, and the reason why it's called Helm Grey Castle is that it's not called, uh, uh, Mexico. It's not called the Aztecs. It's not called. It's intentionally making you think this is something you can dive into and see yourself in. There is a
Right.
lot of, and like sorcery. There's that mirror tricks. There's like I want this to challenge you in a different way. And also growing up in Arizona, there was a lot of issues with teaching Hispanic studies, and we weren't allowed to learn about ourselves.
What do
And
you
I hope
mean weren't allowed? Could you elaborate on that?
the governor, Jan Brewer, had banned Hispanic studies in 2007.
How do you do that?
You're a bigot. You
That's
have that
crazy.
power. You have it. They couldn't do it. They were able to
As
reverse it.
as a discipline, I mean, just a
The
broad,
teacher,
sorry,
they
broad
were
net of you can't teach anything about
Hispanic studies.
Hispanic studies, Hispanic culture.
Yeah, no,
Wow,
there
interesting.
there is an
That's unfortunate.
amazing Daily Show uh, segment where they talk to the educational superintendent, and he is making like elaborate lies, saying that the kids were only going to this class to eat burritos.
That's
Just
disgusting.
racist, dumb crap.
Yeah. And I
So
should
when
say I laughed earlier out of discomfort.
Oh yeah. No, I know. I could see
Yeah.
you, but your listeners might think different. So thank you for mentioning that. Listeners, he's an ally. He's one of the good ones. So um, I want to incorporate an educational portion of this that speaks to the beauty of the indigenous Mexican Mixtecas, the Mayans, and the Aztecs, and talk about because when we're talking about Mexico, when we're talking about south of the border, the narrative that Trump has put out there is that they're rapists and they're murderers and they're thieves. and I
Right.
want to celebrate these people and give them more of a reason to celebrate something like this.
Right. So one, it's not even a question, but it was a concept I kind of wanted to explore with you. Um, and to preface it, I'll say I went to university in Hawaii, which is a land of indigenous peoples, and I did have some education about various cultures and indigenous groups in Hawaii and Polynesia, as well as in the United States. And your previous comic, Tata Rambo, looked at an area of the country that's just north of the border. And you mentioned that maybe your great grandfather's tribe, if I didn't misunderstand you, escaped maybe some or moved north into what is now continental United States at some point in history to escape the conquistadors or
The Mexican government,
the
yeah.
the Mexican government. Okay, thank you for clarifying. And yeah, it's not a fully formed question, but the exploration of borders and dividing people and how we assumed that a line on the map is a clear division of this culture versus that culture. Um, and I'm going to try to put this into a question. How do you explore that? How did you explore that in Tata Rambo, and how do you explore that, if at all, in Helm Grey Castle? This idea of just like fluidity of boundaries, the idea that a government could come in and say that, if you live south of this invisible line, you are with that group of people. If you live north of it, you're with this group of people. Like, I just want to explore that with you, coming from the understanding of your previous work and your great grandfather's work in
Yeah, I
activism.
mean, one of the things about La Voz De Mayo was explaining the importance of saving this area, this neighborhood called the Blue Moon District. My great grandfather Ramon was married to my great grandmother Leonor, who was a Native American, who was an indigenous woman, and that's why he fought that fight. And when you are trying, and I was trying to give a mini crash course on, well, who are the Pascua? They're from Mexico. They were raped and slaughtered by the conquistadors. Then they had um, inter conflict with each other, different beliefs and different skin colors and different wealth. Then there's that war between the Mexican government and the Yaqui people. The Yaquis, well, the Yaquis, the Yoeme teamed up with the French, lost the French Mexican War. So then they had to they lost, so they had to move forward, move up, move away from the oppression. And they had, been indigenous to the Sonoran Desert, but they had crossed the line that had crossed them and this native land. And growing up in the city of South Tucson, a lot of people in Tucson had never been to my neighborhood or never been down on the south side. And I'm sure where you live, there are just, oh, that's the south side, that's the east side, that's the north side, that's where those people live. There
Right.
is
Yeah.
a,
Where I grew up in New York, for sure. And
yeah,
I'm just not aware of those artificial boundaries yet
right.
here where I am now in North Carolina, but they certainly
Especially in New
exist.
York, yeah, that's the Jewish neighborhood, that's the Italian neighborhood, that's the Irish neighborhood, that's Harlem. We do that on our own. And in Tucson, a lot of people came in, and when that book was written in the 60s into the 70s, a big boom post World War II of aerospace engineering, and military, the Davis Mountain Air Force Base. So you had a lot of the black people live on the southwest side in the desert, in the beautiful desert, but very desolate and away from city services. You had all the Native Americans by the dump where my great grandfather and his wife and their family lived. Then you had the city of South Tucson, which was, 40 minutes away from the Mexican border. So naturally, when people came from the border, they found a lot of their own home there. And then the north side is where all the rich white people are. And in Tucson, the northeast side is where all the neo-Nazis live. And that's just the nicer homes, the more expensive homes, the better schools. So within Helm Grey Castle, we see a land that is divided within its own because some of the tribes worked with the Spanish to overthrow Montezuma. So now Montezuma lives and says, I remember you tried to kill me and my people. So this is where you live now. And I'm getting all your riches and your beautiful women and your strongest men, and they work for me now. And then there is no oppression. There is the higher class and the poor class, which is what's happening now. There's always this talk about the disappearing of the middle class, which is what my mom and dad were in. They had 2 homes. They had 2 kids. They had multiple cars. You can't do that now. So you're either rich or you're closer to poverty than you'll ever be to being rich. And that's what I'm trying to explore in Helm Grey Castle is these adventurers come in and they see this, they see the oppression, they see the wealth, they see the injustice, they see the potential of them being a part of this world and living a life that they could all build together from the ground up. And how do we all come to yes?
I like that. And thank you for turning my non-question into the answer that I was after with my non-question. I am interested in exploring this, we have an idea of Mexicans. What does that mean? Mexicans are also a diverse people. And whether it's the Mexicans who still live south of the border or the ones who live, with us in the United States, and whether they're new to the country or they're here for multiple generations.
Oh, yeah. You have, people of South America that, my specific, story, my dad's from a border town in Mexico. My mother's family is from the Sonoran Desert. Her family pretty much, to be native in the United States is you had to pretend you weren't. You had to pretend you were Mexican. You had to pretend you were black. You had to not, because the treatment and the ramifications for Native Americans was worse. And then you have the people that are coming from Salvador. There you have people coming from Honduras, and they have a different type of talking, a different culture, different type styles of food, but they're brown and they're here in the United States, so they're automatically default to Mexican.
I wasn't even at all referring to that, but that brings up a interesting point. I was referring specifically to actual Mexicans, but that's a nation state.
Right.
There were many tribes and diverse cultures across that very vast land that ultimately came together to become Mexico. But, there's a lot of diversity within a group of people that we just define as such.
Right.
And so it's cool to see that you're exploring that, not just in, a more historical comic like Tata Rambo, but also in a fantasy novel. I think that's adds layers of depth, which is,
it's like a nachos
that I keep coming back to.
You got the meat and the cheese and the chips and the salsa.
So what do you think it would have done for you growing up if you did see more diversity in the authors writing comics and in the comics themselves?
I think it'd be easier for me to get a job. I have more people in Hollywood interested in working with me than I do people in the comic book industry.
Interesting. Why?
I don't know.
Yeah.
Because Because there are nobody like me writing Captain America. There's no one like me writing Batman or the X-Men. You know, that's just not how they envision. They don't think I could do it. You know, so if there was more people like me doing this, it'd be a lot easier to convince these people.
And do you think now, knowing that there are those, let's just call them barriers, are you kind of on the fuck the system, I'm going to do it my way, and that's what you're doing with your Kickstarters? Do you want to, where do you see your future going, having said that? Do you want to break into the system and change the system, or do you want to create your own system and your own path?
I do not want to negotiate with these people. If I didn't have to raise money for Helm Grey Castle, I wouldn't. I wouldn't want to tap into my personal network of people that have known me from my days as a banker, as a journalist, as a radio DJ, as a comedian, as a jazz festival organizer, as a,
we missed a few of those when you gave
yeah,
us your biography.
So I've developed a network of people that care about me and want to see me do well, and I want there to be a publisher or a studio that's can recognize that I can do this and can advance me some money, and more importantly, advance the people making these comics. And if I have to raise the money to pay everybody, I will, and I can. That's why in this Kickstarter, if you want to learn how to do that, I'm doing a video series for each step of the way. I'm going to give you my secrets.
For running a Kickstarter and
specifically to comics. It's called How Not to Kickstart Your Comic.
Very cool.
Because if you fail, then I told you how not to do it.
So no excuses, folks.
Yeah. Exactly.
And what's the timeline for releasing that if it's not already out?
Everything is going to be out in April.
Okay, and that's a separate project that you're working on. A video.
I'm working on it in real time. We're recording it right now. You're in it.
Oh, cool.
No, I'm kidding. I am doing it as I'm building the project, as I'm fulfilling.
You successfully punked me. I thought, all right, I guess I'm going to be in
Jamie
this project.
Kennedy is in your closet. He needs a place to stay.
Maybe I should have kept it open. Avoid surprises. Interesting. Lost my train of thought. How many projects do you have? And if you have to go, we could wind down anytime. I'm having a good time. And
yeah, same.
Yeah.
How many projects do I have?
Yeah, if you like, this is another interesting question I ask. I always get a diverse set of answers.
I have a superhero comic I want to do. I have a crime comic, a true crime comic I want to do. I have that children's story I want to do. I have a YA story I want to do, and a whodunit noir that I want to do, and another nonfiction comic about an important Mexican American. So I have 6 projects. Oh, and a Western comic. So I have 7 projects to do after this.
And how do you work on those? Do you work on them simultaneously, and are they all pretty well fleshed out, various stages of development, or just the idea?
Only one that needs more fleshing is the Western comic.
Oh, cool. So the rest are like pretty much written and
pretty much ready to start. They're not written. The first chapter or the first issue are, but not the whole thing.
Very cool. Yeah, I wanted to make the comment, and you could turn it into a question, just revert back on it. But I think now is the time, speaking as a white heterosexual male growing up in the 90s. And, I grew up in a pretty diverse neighborhood in New York, and I had a lot
And where
of
at?
Portchester, New York.
Okay.
Shout out to my hometown. Large Hispanic population. And
Where is that next to?
it is north of the Bronx by like 20 minutes.
Okay.
And it's a blue collar neighborhood between more white collar neighborhoods.
Yeah, the
And
more north you go, yeah.
yeah, it's attracted, over the course of history, it's attracted, I think, blue collar immigrants, starting with Italians, and then Hispanic folks
Right.
came in when I was growing up. And yeah, it's interesting. Like you said, you create a more diverse fantasy, and it poses with a more diverse set of characters, and it poses the question to everyone, including people like me, why wasn't this done before? And for me, the most important thing maybe is, exploring the why, but also realizing that this is a point in time where you're, reestablishing the starting point. And now we at some point, hopefully we get past that and don't have to ask those questions. And we are.
Well, then I'll be out of a job. That's not good.
No, then you can explore deeper questions. Then you can
Right.
explore maybe
Yeah.
the deeper diversity of tribes within groups.
Definitely.
And
No, you're right.
yeah,
As a, identifying cis heterosexual Mexican American with indigenous backgrounds, I recognize my privilege, that I do. There is some privilege there. That's why I have Gabby doing the letters. That's why I have Tristan J. Water doing the role-playing comic. That's why I have Jen Vaughn, who's doing the spot illustrations. That's why I have Sasha Head, who's doing the design work, who works on Jonathan Hickman books, who's an amazing. I have more non-male, men on this book than some publishers have in their staff. Than some publishers publish comics on a monthly basis. And I'm someone who's always clamoring for this. So I wanted to put my money where my mouth is.
that's awesome. Yeah, I'm excited, and I'm excited to see how we move forward, and how, our kids, what kind of fantasy worlds they are, first introduced to. Is it, maybe it's Helm Grey Castle.
The thought of I always forget. Sometimes I'll be at a con and I'll talk to somebody who's with their kids or their significant other and convince them to buy my book, and they'll tell me, this is my first comic I ever bought. And you're just like, oh, I forgot that one of the things I've learned in this industry by someone like Brian Michael Bendis is every comic book is somebody's first and last comic book.
Interesting. Can you speak to that a little bit more?
Yeah. So this first issue, I want this to be their first introduction to either me or the medium or the fantasy realm or the, different aspects. And hopefully it's like, something that they love and they want to keep doing, or this is the comic where they put it down and say, this isn't for me.
Couldn't get used to reading the panels and where the dialogue was going.
I only read right to left. I only read manga, so. Or maybe, you just never know. Like we all fall in and out of comics. I think, I'm lucky that it's my business and it's what pays my bills. And if it weren't for that, I'm sure I'd be, doing something else.
So is there any other form of storytelling besides comic book writing that you do? Is there other forms of media consumption besides reading comics that inspires you?
I mean, I love music. I'm a big music fan. I used to be a radio DJ, so I'm always looking for different bands and different songs. And when it comes to storytelling, I guess it's prose, writing books.
So you do write books, and
I'm trying. Yeah. That's my next goal. is writing a book. Right now, I'm working on how not to kickstart your comics. That's the first trade book I'm working on. But I have some other non-fiction work. But I had operated in the journalism space for 2 years, so I have an ability to write that people pay attention to for some reason, and I'm very grateful for that.
Nice. And then anything else that's inspiring you outside of comics, like a particular genre of movies,
Right.
or what do you do in your free
Yeah, I
time?
love film. I'm a big film guy. There is in Los Angeles, we're really lucky, and we have a streaming service through our public library called Canopy, and they have all the A24 movies on there. And I
Oh, wow.
love, Moonlight, and I just watched the Farewell about the fake Chinese wedding, so that their
That
grandma
was
can.
good.
Yeah, that was. I just watched that. That was a beautiful movie. Um, I love jazz, big jazz fan. So I've been listening to a lot of jazz, and I've been into. I'm a big wrestling fan, so I've been watching a lot of old wrestling on Instagram.
How far back into wrestling history?
90s. I mean, I have a like idiot savant like level of wrestling history where I'm surprised I can tie my shoes. So I do know too much about it. And I just got this. I don't know if your readers won't be able to see it, or your listeners won't be able to see it.
We
I
can
got this Bret the
describe it.
Hitman Hart jacket
Oh, sick.
that I
Wear that
love a
out on
lot.
the town. I was hoping that you were gonna pull out one of those like 2 foot tall plush
Oh, the
doll.
wrestling buddies.
Yeah.
Yeah. Did you have? I had Hulk Hogan, Warrior, Macho Man.
No, I didn't get any
Well, you were
of
probably too old
those.
by then, right? You're
Not
what, four
really.
years
My
ahead of
parents
me?
were like not totally stoked on me watching wrestling, even though, and I didn't have cable.
Oh,
So we
so was it
only
the oiled
watched
up men in the
we only
weird
watched on
Star
Sundays or
Trek?
Saturdays. No, we got some wrestling, but it was like the B roll, like the whatever matches that they didn't air on cable.
Yeah, the house matches.
Yeah, but got to see Razor Ramon a bit. I was a big Razor Ramon fan.
The bad guy.
Yeah, Chico.
Circle night to the bad guy, Chico. Yep.
Probably not the best
Role model.
role model, yeah, or cultural stereotype. Now looking
He
back at it,
have you heard the way he pitched that character?
no.
He he pitched this character to Vince McMahon and just told him the plot to Scarface. And Vince McMahon had never seen Scarface and thought this was brilliant,
Brilliant.
original.
I did not know that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He was actually a pretty good athlete too. Really good. I thought he was a pretty good wrestler. But yeah, no, I know too much about all that dumb stuff. So,
Who are your favorites?
oh,
Well, it's
my
not dumb
favorite.
if it brings a smile to your face and you're smiling.
Exactly. I'm not. I'm not talking down on wrestling, but I'm just self-deprecating. My favorite wrestlers were Bret the Hitman Hart. He was my favorite. Stone Cold Steve Austin, The Rock. I really appreciated the Mexican luchadors like Eddie Guerrero, Rey Mysterio, La Parca, and Ultimo Dragon, and Mankind. I got my boss a cameo from Mick Foley, and he had done the cameo within like 40 minutes. And he did this like 4 minute long rant. It was incredible. Such a great. Yeah, I love the kayfabe. I love like the behind the scenes stuff. Yeah, no, I'm such a big fan. I stopped watching it when John Cena started rapping,
I
and I
didn't
was
know that took place. I think I was in and out of it like I was with reading comics.
yeah,
And my last phase was like quick in and out with the Hardy Boys. I enjoyed
yeah, the
them for a
Hardy
while.
Boys,
The High
yeah, one of the
Flyers.
best. Yeah, they were one of the best tag teams. I loved like the Road Warriors. Owen Hart. I'm such a, now in retrospect, because of his death, they just stopped airing any of his matches, or he just was completely erased from the history. So there's a lot of matches I'm watching on Instagram that he had done. The Undertaker retiring after 30 years. So yeah, no, that's been taking up some of my undivided attention recently.
And do you watch new content, or are you
No,
just going for straight nostalgia?
I'm actually looking at it as I appreciate the wrestling technique. I really appreciate the art and trying to seeing what they were doing back then. Now it's not interesting to me. The AEW, yeah, AEW stuff is actually a little bit more interesting to me because there's like a Luchasaurus. There's like a Mexican wrestler, but he's like a dinosaur. There's just like I think there needs to be more of that camp, and WWE is really banking on like real people like Daniel Bryan,
Yeah,
like
yeah, yeah,
guys that I work, that work at a call center. They sound like these kinds of people that I don't care. Like
yeah, yeah.
I
Like
hate
whenever
Jake the
I,
Snake Roberts, but like the reason why we like Jake the Snake is because he came with a snake,
right, yeah, yeah.
you
I
know?
love the camp too. And that's exactly how I feel whenever I see any new WWE content. And it's just like, oh, it's some guy with his shirt off, you know?
If you love that, sure, like these are
Yeah.
attractive people, and
And they still
it's
have, from what I understand, really engaging and fun stories. But I'm a sucker for
yeah.
good campiness.
If you don't if you don't have a bird and you're not Coco Beware, I don't care. I
You get a
want
gimmick in
yeah,
my book.
yeah. No, and I think it like when John Cena got on and was rapping, I realized this is where I get off on this train. You can stay on and enjoy it and love it, but I am no longer. They are not talking to me anymore.
Right, right. You should check out, if you haven't ever done so, Kaiju Big Battle. I don't know if they're what their current state of operation is, but it was essentially like creating a giant robot setting within a ring, and
Oh, that's great.
they had live events when I was in high school.
Yeah,
I saw
the
one in
Japanese
Brooklyn.
love wrestling. I mean, they're a huge.
This was I think they're out of Boston, but
Oh
Japan,
wow.
yeah, Japan has a huge pro wrestling circuit that is still alive and well, and I'm, I mean Mexico as well.
Oh yeah.
Such a rich history. Is that
Oh,
something
definitely.
that you know much about? And I mean, I just had this idea of a really historical wrestling Mexican lucha libre wrestling comic that you should write.
Oh, there
Just
is. There is one. Gonzo, who drew my graphic novel, he has a comic out there called La Mano del Destino, and it's like it takes place in the 60s. It's very Madman-esque, and it's like this wrestler gets demasked and he gets his belt taken away from him, so he has to rise to the top again, and it's very good.
that sounds awesome. And
Yeah.
is his style pretty consistent? So
Oh
it's
yeah.
yeah.
Very consistent. Yeah. I wanted that style. I was like, I want you to do what you love because this is for something you don't own. This is for me. So I want you to have as much fun with this as possible.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know,
I'll have to check that out because
I'll
I'm
yeah, I'll
interested
link
in
you
his.
and you can
Yeah,
talk.
please do. Um, I think that's about it for me. I don't know if you have any questions or anything else you wanted to riff on before I let you go.
No, I am so honored you asked, and I am very grateful that you care enough to want to know more about me and my projects. And I wish the best of luck to you, and I hope you are staying safe, and I look forward to talking to you again.
Likewise, yeah, I'm giving you all of the thanks on this Thanksgiving Eve. I almost forgot to do that actually.
Oh yeah,
Um,
as I learn more about my indigenous background, the more guilty I feel when I celebrate this holiday. But it's I have a lot of Native American friends that celebrate Thanksgiving. So
yeah, it's interesting. I guess for me, um, I try to focus on the gratitude part of it.
Yeah, definitely.
You don't necessarily, although it's intimately tied in a lot of ways, find the good in the stuff that you do, and you know the practices and the traditions that are here. Recognize maybe some of the faults and then emphasize the good spots. So
Oh, definitely.
let me say here and now, I am very grateful and thankful that you joined me. And I look forward to having you on again if you're receptive to it. Anytime you have a project you want to talk about.
Sure. Oh, yeah.
I'll re-listen to this episode so I don't repeat questions, and we could get deeper in the weeds in a different direction.
Well, we could do this same exact interview, and we'll be
We could
better
try
at
to
it.
replicate it.
Yeah.
That would be a feat.
We'll cover it.
Yeah. And if you know anybody who wants to come on and chat with the likes of me on What's Your Random, please have them reach out or make an introduction. I'm
Oh, definitely.
receptive to all types of creative folks. So
No, it's good to meet you and talk to you, and I will look forward to having another conversation soon.
thank you very much. Henry Barajas was here to talk about Helm Grey Castle. Henry, thank you very much for sharing all you had to share about your past, present, and future projects, your creativity, and your random. And I think a lot of folks are going to be motivated and inspired by what you had to share with us today. So everybody get out there and explore and enjoy and celebrate your own random. Thanks. Hello, fellow randoms, and thank you for hanging on tight after we hung up for the debriefing. Some key takeaways. Well, before I get into the takeaways, I want to say go ahead and check out Henry's project on Kickstarter. He has 7 days left as of December 2nd, 2020. And he'd certainly appreciate your support. And I think a lot of people out there who are supporting the project are hoping they can make some of their stretch goals and expand the experience. So check it out. Now, as for my key takeaways, there were some areas, and this has been a stumbling block for me, I have a concept, but I don't have an actual question. And my guests have been good enough so far to turn my non-question into a question, and really are answering to the essence of what I want to drill into. But I need to be better about formulating questions sometimes. I have a rambling of ideas in my head, a rambling random of ideas in my head, and I see them converging into an interesting question, and sometimes I'm not able to make them really congeal. So that's something I need to work on, as well as articulation of my tongue. Sometimes I'm stuttering and falling over my own words and tongue. So that's maybe a brain to mouth issue there. But other than that, I think that we had a great discussion and were able to dive into some of the meat and really explore how comics could be a medium to explore and teach. And that's the word I want to focus on and emphasize in this sentence is comics could be used to teach us about history, teach us about other people, other cultures, and explore ideas. And I think what Henry is doing is really beautiful to bring a more diverse cast into fantasy, which typically is pretty homogeneous. And I think that's going to slowly but surely, and maybe hopefully quickly, change. And Henry is going to be on the forefront of catalyzing that change. So kudos to him. I really enjoyed those angles of the conversation, and I hope you did too. So that was my key takeaway. And I already talked about what I can do to improve in reverse order today. So what are you guys up to, my fellow randoms? What is your project? What's your passion? What's your random? Whatever it is, go out there and pursue it, and holler at us. What's your random on Twitter and Instagram. We'd love to hear about our listeners' projects and what makes you tick, what makes you random. So until next time, enjoy your random. Thanks.